All right, hello everyone. Today I'm going to just kind of walk you through this really cool way of coming up with story plotting. So the goal of this video is to walk you through a tool to help you figure out how to take a story idea and then put it into a story shape that has a clear beginning, middle, and end. There's a really cool resource that I'm going to share with you. Um, it is based on a concept for storytelling by one of the great American authors of all time, Kurt Vonnegut. Here we go. This is story shaping. Again, the goal here is to help you to take an idea that you have for a story and then begin that process of fleshing it out. How can I take an idea and make sure it has a clear beginning, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, all that stuff that you learned in years past. So when I'm in class, normally I'll walk my students through a video, but there's not really a good way to show videos through a recorded tool like Zoom. So I'm going to do my best to sort of narrate this video as it goes to introduce the concept of story shapes. So real quick, before we get into that, the video we're about to watch is from an author named Kurt Vonnegut, one of my probably top five favorite authors of all time. He lived from 1922 to 2007. He's the author of short stories, of novels, of articles, of opinion pieces. He's very prolific and well respected. So one of the things you need to know is that he's a witty guy, he's humorous, and his writing style takes really complex stories but makes them simple and digestible. And I think one of the ways he does that is because he's so good at shaping his stories. So one of the things that he did that is really popular even today is that he identified that stories and the way that they're shaped have archetypes. So this might be another archetype that we've learned, that stories generally follow the same pattern or the same mold. And there are multiple molds that stories can take, but what I'm going to show you is an introduction to three of the most famous story molds that exist. So again, I'm going to try to play this video and narrate as he goes. So I apologize if this doesn't work super well, but bear with me. It's sort of the best option that we have. So let me pop open this YouTube video real quick. And I'm going to mute the volume. I've seen this video enough that I can kind of really repeat what he's going to say. I might turn on closed caption to see if that works. So again, this is Kurt Vonnegut, and he is in a lecture here in front of an audience of, probably hundreds of students, of authors, and he's introducing the idea that stories have shapes. They all follow the same mold, and that if you follow this, you too can write a really good story. So he starts here by drawing a line that he calls an axis. So he draws the G top of the line and the I bottom of the line. And what those represent at the top is good fortune. So things that are going well for the characters. At the bottom of the line is ill fortune. Then he draws a line left to right. It's the axis that he calls the B-E axis. And so in this case, the B stands for beginning of a story, and E stands for end of a story. So again, generally stories follow the same shape. And if you go beginning to end over time, just like you could use with a graph in a math class, you can track how stories go up and down as they progress. So what he's going to do is he's going to introduce the story. It begins somewhere in good fortune. So a character starts in the good fortune line. As you see that shape, as time goes on, they lose something. Something bad goes wrong. They go down to ill fortune, and then they get back out of it again. He claims this is the most common story to tell. Characters start in a good place, they go to a bad place, and they come back out of it. And he offers the concept that if you write this story, you can win $1 million, which is kind of a silly thing he does. The next line is a character who starts with really nothing phenomenal. They get something, and then he says, oh, God, dang it, and they lose it. They go into ill fortune, and they come back out. So again, that shape I'll show you an example here in a minute. But the common thing is that in both cases, the characters have something, they lose something, something goes bad, and then they recover and they get back out of that conflict. Okay? So, this third story shape he's going to tell is of a story that we all know. And right now, he's sort of talking that up and building that up and introducing the idea that sometimes story shapes can look a little more complex, and they should. They should have more detail as they go. So, in this case, he's going to begin with a little girl, the story of a little girl who starts in ill fortune, almost down at the very, very bottom of the line. It can't get really worse for her. She's got two evil sisters, stepsisters. She's lost her father. And so as she putters along in this story, she's really going to struggle. And these two evil sisters, her stepmom, are really cruel to her. And then one night, a fairy godmother approaches her. And the fairy godmother is going to try to improve her fortune. Again, she's in the lowest part. He claims she's had the maximum whack from fate, which is the idea that things can't get much worse for her. But in this night, again, she's going to be approached by a fairy godmother who is going to attempt to improve her situation. So that night, she gives her shoes, gives her a dress, gives her a mode of transportation to take her to a ball. She is going to go to this party. At the party, she meets Prince Charming. Everything is as good as it possibly can be, and all of a sudden, clock strikes. And then in this video, he goes boing, boing, boing. So the clock strikes midnight, and on that dime, she loses everything again. It goes back down into ill fortune. Okay, so does she go back to the place she was at the beginning, her lowest fortune? No, she doesn't, because she's had this experience of going to a party and having a really good night. As the story progresses, she putters along again. The prince approaches her. She fits. She achieves infinite happiness. That is the story, as you probably know, of Cinderella. So that is sort of the idea of story shapes. And again, watching the video would have helped you to understand that a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully provide additional resources to help you to sort of understand this concept. So this is sort of a mock-up that I would give if we were in class. That's the same thing. You have this axis that goes, the Y and the X axis, good fortune, bad fortune, okay, or ill fortune. And that is the north to south. From east to west, you have the beginning of your story, and as time goes on, you approach the end. Over the course of your story, things happen that are good, things happen that are bad, and so your character can go up and down, and really that has to do with conflict. So what's really cool is that I'm going to give you this resource. If you're a person that has no idea what story shape to write, here are 8 possible frameworks for telling a story with some real examples. And this is really neat. So this first one is called Man in Hole, which he talked about in his video. And it's the idea that you start somewhere, if you look at my cursor, with good fortune, you putter along, and then a storm event happens. You lose something, a death, there's a tragedy, and you go into really low ill fortune, bad fortune. You work really hard, you go on an epic journey, you climb out of it, and then you come back into good fortune. It's called Man in Hole. Another example would be someone who's just puttering along average, something really wonderful happens to them and in the beginning of the story, and then boom, they lose it and they fight to get it back. Okay. There's a story called From Bad to Worse, where a character starts sort of average, and then over the course of the story, only bad things happen, and then they die. Another story is, it's a story that's not quite clear which way's up. You might go up and down, good and bad, and then by the end, you're not really sure. The example here would be Hamlet. You have creation stories where you start with an okay fortune, and then over the course of the story, things just get better, 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 and then you end. I would say this story is not as common in our Western storytelling, and it's kind of hard to tell an interesting story that has no conflict. So you might avoid the creation story shape. Another one would be the Old Testament. story shape, which is the idea that good things happen, good things happen, good things happen, a mistake is made, and you lose it all. So a really good example here might be maybe Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. The New Testament version, the same thing, good things, good things, good things. Tragedy strikes, you lose it, but then you dig yourself out and you return to good fortune. And the last one's the Cinderella story, which is just like the New Testament story. You start somewhere rough, you get a really good thing that happens, tragedy strikes, go back into bad fortune, but you come out of it again. So I think another good way to do this is to actually model it for you with a movie or a story that we all know. So I'm going to try to do that. So here I have my document camera, and I'm going to draw this out. And you at home who are going to, I'm going to ask that you actually complete this and do this sort of over the next few days. I want you to try to find either a blank piece of paper or a lined piece of paper. It doesn't really matter. It's just something that you can write this on. And the simple idea is that you start by drawing a line that goes top to bottom, vertical line, and up here you can put good, and down here at the bottom you can put bad. Then you draw a second line from left to right, a horizontal line, x-axis. This is beginning, and then at the end, of course, is end. And so then you have to consider your story. And you might do this in pencil, by the way, because as you shape your story out, you might realize that you want to maybe change a few things. I'm going to start with a movie that hopefully you've all heard of called Finding Nemo. So I'm going to name this Finding Nemo story. All right, so here is what I would say. Thinking about it, where does Finding Nemo start? The very beginning of that movie. We start with Marlin and his wife, and they have all these beautiful eggs, and they're about to become parents, and they're really excited about it. I would say that's probably just about the best place you can be, okay? So the beginning, I would say married with children. One of the first things that happens in this story is what? The barracuda comes. The barracuda comes and it destroys their family. It eats Marlin's wife, and only one egg is left behind. So I would argue that if you're going to draw that shape, immediately, boom, he goes from having the best thing happen to almost the worst thing happen. Now, the question is, does he go all the way down here to the worst possible place? No, because Marlin still has one kid left, a damaged egg. So I would say I'll draw a point right there. That point, I would say, loses family to a barracuda, comma, one egg left. And that egg is Nemo, okay? So over the next part of the story, we kind of get to a better place. We come back up, good things are happening, Nemo's growing, he's coming of age, he goes to school, so going to school is very exciting, he probably comes back to good fortune, and I would say we'll stop here for a second. Nemo goes to school. Okay, now, when Nemo's at school, as you may remember, there's something that happens that is, a Kickstarter for conflict for the movie. What does he do? He touches the butt. Whenever he touches the butt, what happens? He is taken captive by the scuba diver. So I would say, boom, your story comes back down. The question is, how far do we go down? Does Nemo, for Marlin, if this is a story about Marlin, does it go lower than losing his family? I would say so. He's lost his boy. So it's not the worst because Nemo may not be dead, but he's gone. So Nemo is lost. Okay. So over the next part of the story, Marlin has to go on a journey to find Nemo. I would say he swims along, he tries to find people, and then he comes back up. Something kind of good happens. He finds Dory. When he finds Dory, Dory gives him information about, where they go on many journeys. One of the things that happens is they find the goggles and they realize it has an address on it. And the address might be where Nemo is. So I would argue he finds Dory, and then another good thing that happens is they find the address for Nemo. Now, is this as high as Nemo going to school? No, it's not as good because Nemo's still lost. In fact, you might want to even put this lower, but it's a really positive thing that happens, and it seems like conflict resolution is coming in this moment. Finds the address for Nemo. You could argue that they go up and down on their journey. They find the sharks. They struggle with the jellyfish, this and that. I'm not going to draw all that out just for sake of example. But what I will say is my next point, after finding the address and sort of going up and down a little bit, he finds Nemo again, right? Now, you could say that the story ends here, but not quite. There's a little bit of detail at the end that you want to consider. He finds Nemo, but then at the very, very end, Dory is taken in that net, that fishing net. So then Dory is taken along with the other fish, but they escape. And by the end of the movie, of the story, I argue that it's better than it was when it started, but not quite as high as it could be. Okay, so it's not way up here with Married with Children, but it's higher than Nemo going to school. Why? Nemo returns to school and he is brave. Marlin has grown as a person as well, as a character as well. Marlin isn't so controlling over Nemo. He himself is brave. He's cracking jokes and he's a little bit more lighthearted. So the general shape here would probably be Man in Hole, where you have good things happen, it's all lost, and they come out of it again. Okay. What you can see here is that I've given you some really simple detail about what happens over the course of the story. And I'm using a story that already exists here. Your goal would be to shape your own story. To do something like this, use these frameworks, and then maybe create something like this. Okay, so this is a real student example from a couple years ago. Maybe I think this is 2 years ago, and it's a story that this character, or excuse me, this student plotted it out. They used the New Testament story example, and then as you can see on this, there are multiple little bullet points that this student wrote, and it details what happens to the character along the way. You could do something like this, or you could do something that looks a little bit more like the example that I just went through. That looks more like this, okay? So that's the goal. This is something that might be a little bit challenging. If you need help with it, please reach out to me, let me know. In the end, it should be helpful. If you want, this link to this file is up on Schoology. You can go and watch this video. And I really might recommend you do that to help you out. I'm not setting a deadline for this, like a hard deadline for this story shaping. What I want you to do is to start the process probably today, think about it, give it a try and see how it goes. By next week, the goal is for you to create an original story shape using one of your brainstorms, okay? So again, we have this brainstorming document that we're using. We have 4 ideas that you've come up with. Pull the trigger on one of those. Try to see if that story is going to work for you, and try to shape this out, okay? I want you to make sure that you use an infographic to help you. And then the thing that I really want is for you to use key details or plot points that you describe that goes with your story shape, okay? So again, student example here, frameworks to use here, and there's this video that you can watch that's actually linked in your brainstorming document that's gonna help you, okay? Hopefully this is fun, hopefully this is easy once you kind of get the hang of it, and I'm here to help if you have any questions. All right, thank y'all.